Hey everybody, welcome to a new year and a new course. I'm really excited to introduce figure drawing for storytelling. Let me find the right tab first. There we go. Figure drawing for storytelling. Uh, who is this course for? Anyone. All ages. Who is this course? Oh, hold on. I probably should set this up beforehand. Who is this course for in regards to the Patreon? Well, it's for the $5 tier. Last year, with Operation Happy Tears, I respect my Patreon. I wanted to make the $5 tier a lot more broad, open, and available to a lot bigger audience and bigger demographic. So I've started posting the All the Beautiful This comic on it, and it shifted away from being an artist tier and towards being just a more general support Space Boy tier. However, artists, I have not forgotten you, and just as you, no doubt, signed on to this tier in order to grow as an artist, I still have this deep desire to grow as an artist as well. And I also feel like if you are just a casual person who enjoys drawing, you might enjoy this class. It's basically a class. Um, uh, so maybe you signed on to the Space Commando tier just to support me, but now you have access to this drawing class. Why not join me? Or maybe uh, you know, maybe you have like a 12-year-old nephew or a daughter who is really into Space Boy who might really enjoy this drawing class. Join us. Join us. I was talking to my wife about how there's this sort of stereotype that at the beginning of a new year, people make all these resolutions and say like, I'm going to be a great artist, and then you like start sketching in your sketchbook every single day, and then it peters out at about the 3 month mark. And I was saying, that is like, it's not the best pattern of behavior, but think about it. That's 3 months of like good hard work. I mean, that's pretty good when you think about it. So that's what we're going to do, everybody. We're going to make these resolutions, grand resolutions to get better. Maybe it's only going to last a couple months, but that still counts. And at the end of the 3 months, when we all get tired of all this drawing and all this working hard, then we're going to figure out a new way to get ourselves to improve and to enjoy learning. And we'll come to that uh, we'll come to that crossroad when we get there. So that's who this course is for. What is the course? There's going to be 3 lectures, one at the beginning of each month, January, February, March. At the end of each of those months, this is going to be homework, you guys. So this lecture is going to be accompanied with some homework. You're going to practice the concepts that we talk about in each lecture throughout the month, and then you're going to submit your work to me for a critique session at the end of each month. And there probably will be more learning in the critique sessions happening than even in my lectures. So don't miss either of those things. Yeah. So without further ado, figure drawing for storytelling. Oh dear. My pen seems to have lost its lead. It's been doing that today. It's weird. Okay. Figure drawing for storytelling. Two simple definitions for moving forward. What is figure drawing for storytelling? What does that mean exactly? Um, I am not going to get into complicated anatomy or high, like where bones fit in or all this stuff. I'm going to be sort of illuminating for you guys as best I can a set of tools that were developed in the early 1920s and 30s by the early Disney animators. Basically, in my mind, this is where it all comes from. A set of tools for creating characters that that are optimized for storytelling, that are expressive and clear and easy to read and are full of emotion and story. So these rules are, for me, they represent kind of the grammar of art that has clarity. My goal as a cartoonist is to make comics that nourish, and in order to do that, I need my work to be legible and understandable as quickly as possible. And so, clarity, um, believability, and I want people to believe in my characters, that they're real. And then also beauty. I don't know why, but beauty is an essential part of storytelling. Um, you can create you can't create stories without beauty in them, but I can't know. I don't know why, but I feel like I don't know why. This is a mystery to me. I don't know why beauty is so essential. But we'll also be covering like what makes something look beautiful, what makes something look appealing. So these tools, these are the basics of storytelling. Sorry, these are like the fundamentals of drawing for clarity, of drawing for story. So if you're creating a story, if you're a storyboard artist, or if you just want to create expressive characters, or you want to be a cartoonist yourself, these tools, which are very clearly defined, uh, are ready and available for us to learn. And I'm going to be teaching you guys sort of the basics of them in this course. So, one more definition before we move on. I've recently found a better way of understanding what mastery is. Mastery is an expression of the basics. So I think there's a lot of us who we say, I want to become. Let me just check real here. Make sure we're recording and everything's going good. A lot of us artists will say, oh yes, I want to be a master artist. Yes, please. By the way, I'm sorry, I'm pretty sick right now. I have a stuffy nose, so I apologize for that. We say, yes, I want to be a master. And we assume that a master is someone who knows all this esoteric, mysterious, high-level techniques that we are not fully aware of. But recently, I've come to realize that there's nothing. This is going to sound weird, but there's nothing actually complicated about what a master is doing. That every single principle, every single basic fundamental is very easy to define. It's just that I think a master is someone who, for every single drawing, applies every single fundamental, like religiously. One of the things I've been realizing lately is like, rather than trying to seek to be a better artist, or like seek to learn more new advice or new techniques, or like trying to figure out like how does a hip bone fit into a socket of a joint or whatever, I'm like, no, I just need to go back to those principles that the Disney animators discovered 100 years ago and make sure that they're appearing in every single drawing that I have, because right now they're not. And so it's like, oh, I'm sort of calling my own bluff. I need to actually go forward and implement every single principle. I was talking with my assistant Katie, and she was showing me some of her comics, and I was going through her thumbnails and going like, this panel would benefit from the rule of thirds. So if you just moved the head from the middle down to here, it would be a more dynamic composition. And this panel would benefit from this line of action, showing the flow from this direction. This panel would benefit from a close-up, so that you could have these relationships of small, medium, and big. And she said, I know all of these principles. I learned these in animation school. I already know this, which is why it's frustrating. Here's the thing. It's actually very helpful, though, because now we understand, like, I don't actually need to go figure out something that's mysterious, I actually just need to go learn the basics and then figure out how to implement them in every drawing. Why does it feel like what the masters do is complicated? The reason it feels like that is because if you have a set of simple rules, if you even just have like, let's just say that there's just 6 rules for good drawing, and I actually think you could probably distill good drawing down to 6 simple rules. But if you just had 6 simple rules, this is a picture of some flocks of birds as they're getting ready to nest for the night. Each bird has a set of simple rules, like maybe 3 or 4 rules about how it manages its space from the bird next to it. And on the individual level, each bird only knows these simple rules. But as a whole, these amazingly beautiful patterns can be created out of these simple rules. It's a phenomenon called emergent behavior or emergent complexity, meaning small things following simple rules can produce enormously complex systems once they're, yeah. Like, for instance, ants. An ant is a very taken by itself is a very stupid creature. It will not survive by itself or figure out anything. But an ant is sort of programmed with very specific rules. And if you were to look at the colony as a whole, you would just start to see this emergent behavior that's incredibly sophisticated, complex, reactive to the environment, storing, hiding, farming, creating things, creating its own environment, building. But the ant itself on the individual level isn't like fully aware of this enormous plan. It's just following these simple rules. In the same way, if you want to become a master, the real trick is to try to figure out how to do all of your rules at the same time. How do you implement contrast, dynamic movement, spatial, um, um, like the form of something, like the proper foreshortening and perspective? How do you implement emotion and appealing line shape? How do you do that all at the same time? That's the question we'll be kind of exploring as we move forward, and I hope it's encouraging to you as you consider, like, here's how I'm going to improve as an artist. Let's learn the basics, and then let's keep learning the basics, and let's become sticklers about applying it to every single drawing we have. And it is my hypothesis that just like the birds or the ants or all kinds of emergent systems in nature, just like these emergent, there will come emergent complexity, where by following these simple rules, there's like an infinity of complexity that can be unleashed, and subtlety and interest and really beautiful, amazing work that can be unleashed just by mastering the basics, figuring it out. All right. What is this course going to cover? These 3 pillars: force, form, and rhythm. The first lecture is going to be covering force, the second lecture is going to be covering form, and the final lecture is going to be covering rhythm on our journey to figure out how to draw a figure that is optimized for storytelling. So, I'm going to give you a really basic definitions of each of these right now, and then we're going to jump into force. So let me jump into that. It will be abstract, but I'm going to give you a lot of examples so that by the end you have an understanding, a deeper understanding. The force has many names: gesture, line of action. So if you want to follow up and study this more, go ahead and look these up on the internet. You'll find lots of stuff on that. But in essence, if you look at this figure I drew here, you'll see that there's a certain movement that's happening, and it goes through the character, and it's a reactive movement too. So where this force is coming in here, but look, this leg is sort of catching it and pushing it back out. This leg is kind of pulling off of this main force and flowing out. And then look, these arms right here flow into each other. So that's the force. That's as best as I can describe it right now. Once you have figured out the force or the gesture for your piece, then you're going to be applying your form. Form is anatomy, foreshortening, perspective. So, in the case of our little guy here, let's say I've got my gesture figured out, my force figured out. Then I will go through and apply the form on top. This is when I think about my character's proportions. I think about the angle of the hips and how it sits in space, how the rib cage is oriented, and how anatomy would work. It's kind of a dangerous area to enter into because it's really easy for your figure to all of a sudden become really flat. But knowing these things is really necessary if you want your figure to feel like it has weight and is a real 3D object. And then finally, the rhythm. This is where we consider what type of lines we're going to use on top of this force-filled form. We've created sort of a force-filled form, a form that has a force to it, a form that has meaning. And so then we choose which lines we want to emphasize. So how do we create beautiful lines? We're going to be thinking about straights contrasting with curves. We're going to be thinking about big shapes contrasting with small shapes, stuff like that. So I guess to finish off our character here, now that we have this underlying structure, we've got the force to it, then we're going to be going on top of it and pulling out, here's a straight, here's another straight, here's a curve, and here's a simple line here, a curve, and it tapers down here, and here's an overlap line, and we're going to, and the art of picking those lines is very complicated and interesting. So we're looking for the most beautiful lines to express our final figure. That is the 3 pillars of figure drawing for storytelling: force, form, and rhythm. Each one of them is a whole world of study, but again, I guess it's sort of refreshing, right, to have these basics so clearly outlined, because the better you get at these, the more your drawings will improve, specifically for the sake of clarity, specifically for the sake of storytelling. There is tons of drawings and illustrations and whole genres of art where this is not important to the artists. Clarity is not important. But for me, as someone who really focuses on having a specific meaning that I want to communicate to my audience, clarity, believability, beauty is essential. One last little notes on these guys. You could think of the force as a one-dimensional idea, where it's these arrows. You could think of the form of the rhythm as sort of like two-dimensional ideas, where you're thinking like, oh, what are these shapes on the plane? And you could think of the form as three-dimensional ideas. Some people do it in different orders. Some people go in with the form first and then figure out how to implement the force. Some people try to do the rhythm of it, and then figure out and then derive these other ones from it. There's no step-by-step process really, and for different solutions you'll need different like for different problems, visual problems that you're working on, you might need different solutions. But knowing that you need to touch all of these pillars by the end is what helps the drawing come together. If you only have one of these, it's going to feel off. It's going to feel off, but again, the drawing might still work fine. But you'll see people who only focus on the form, and their drawings get so stiff. you'll see people who only focus on the force, and the characters are alive and moving, but they don't have any consistency from frame to frame. Their noses and eyes and hands change in size and shape. You'll have people who focus only on the rhythm and get really interesting shapes, but again, lack a direction for where it's moving or how it sits in space. So if you want to have a complete picture, we want to be thinking hierarchically, right? There's a whole lecture on hierarchy that you can look up on this Patreon. Hierarchically, what is our one dimension? What is our two dimension? I guess I switched these, but we want to be thinking in all the dimensions in order to get a complete story, complete image. Okay, I did say this was all ages, but maybe a caveat is if you do have someone who's younger who's working with you, you might want to stop and make sure this all makes sense. Hold on, I'm going to go blow my nose and I'll be back. Alright, I'm back. I hope that worked. It's always weird pressing the pause button. Okay, so let's jump into it, everybody. I have 4 different ideas for how to consider force. What is force? There's a lot of ways to understand it. I've already kind of given you a vague outline of what it is, but here are some different paradigms. Here are just some different ways of approaching it. So let's start with the spine. Yeah, we'll start with the spine. So, we're going to start with Disney because, again, I do believe that historically, Disney artists is when we first start seeing these principles of storytelling. And historically, when you think about it, this is really when images were optimized for storytelling, right? It's not that images weren't used for storytelling in the past. It's just that the figure had a lot more, like for an illustration, say, there was other factors at play. The illustrator would have to consider his patron and his audience and how the piece was created and what type of stuff went into it, and he would want the image to just rest and to have people to be able to kind of get lost in the image, and so clarity wasn't necessarily his first priority. But the Disney animators, they realized, like, we need to find the quickest way to give the most emotion and the most clarity about what's going on. And so here we have Mickey, who is the quintessential example of a Disney character. And I'm just going to start going through and tracing the very clear lines of action, which another way to think of it is the spine. I guess if I was to draw Mickey's anatomy, you could see a spine here. His hips, his rib cage, his shoulders. But this is obviously a bit of a simplification. But what's interesting is that you could start by drawing the spine. You quickly realize that the energy from the spine quickly goes out through the top of the head. Look how this circle is almost just pointing. That's kind of mysterious, isn't it? And look at how this goes out through the head, or through the bottom goes throughout the tail. Look at this tail here. This tail goes up straight through this spine and straight through this head. So it's almost like if you just want to figure out his particular gesture, his force that's going through this pose, you start with the tail. And it is a very clear. Look at this. The force in this one goes straight out the tip of the nose. So we see like that. All the way through the body. What that does is when you have a single line of action like this, it makes the motion and even the emotion way more clear. So one of the ways to think about this is in terms of a spine. That's a very simple way to do it. In fact, when I draw, if I was to start off with a drawing, I might make the head, and then I would go for the spine. And you'd be surprised how much emotion you can fit in a spine. Let's just look at that really quickly. So which force is dominant and which force is cowering? It's pretty obvious, I think. So, isn't that extraordinary that with a one-dimensional idea like this line right here, you can actually show an enormous amount of emotion? Isn't that amazing? And there's plenty of other, I could see pride in that potentially. Can you guys see that maybe? A chest that's swollen up. Very proud of himself. So, yeah, so think of it as a spine. But it's not a spine, it's a river. Let's jump on to the next part. Here's the thing. The gesture is not just located, maybe you've already seen this in my work as I've been drawing here. The gesture is not just located in the spine. This very drawing, actually, I have it on my wall over there. I remember I was hanging out with a cartoonist named Michael Regina. He did it, he's done a couple of series. He did a book called The Sleepover, which came out recently, and then he did a series called Adamsville, which was on Webtoons for a while, as a featured artist. I think he's since had it pulled, though. But you could look him up. Anyways, I was at his house, and he had this animation book, and I insisted that he scan this for me, because I was just shocked when I saw it. I was studying force at the time. I was trying to figure out gesture and the line of action. And when I saw these drawings, I was shocked, and I'll show you why. So here's the spine, obviously. But wouldn't you say that these lines themselves have an enormous amount of force in them? And that's where I discovered these interlocking, I discovered two things. That force, that there's sort of this interlocking relationship to force. Where, actually, oops, start out with the, so hard to describe, you guys. We got this, though. We got this. If you were to imagine, getting back to this idea that it's a river, it's water. If you were to imagine that we were pouring water down through the top of the head, where would the water flow? And it's so interesting, you guys, because it's almost like a conspiracy. You could sort of start to see it. Imagine there's water inside of his head, and it's flowing downward. The water would first flow this way, and then it would be caught by this edge here, and it would flow the other way. It might flow into the leg here, and be caught on the bank and flow down like this. Which on the other side is just another form of another flow of water that's going here. So you could almost see water splash, 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 splash. The water's flowing through the form. So this line goes here, splooshes onto the bottom of this, gets caught up back again into the form. This line goes here, and you can almost see this happening inside of the form, where the force is going into itself and constantly being redirected. There's something really profound about this, because I think that when you finally start to understand how motion works and how bodies move across in space, you realize that that is the paradigm that we live under. There's gravity pulling us downward. And so if we want to have a force in any direction, we need to kind of carry with us an equal and opposite reaction to that force. And it is the imbalance of those things that actually causes us to be able to move somewhere. So if I lean to the side, I can start walking. Walking is a weird type of falling when you think about it. But all this energy is falling within inside the body, but then it's being caught up again by another part of the body. You guys see what I'm seeing? Here, the line of action is very clear, right? If we wanted to just do one line, we could do that. But then, if we wanted to do even more, if we wanted to speak even more about the energy of the character, we would show where the flow of energy goes within the body, not just a generalized part of the body as a whole. So that blew my mind. The other thing that blew my mind is that the force runs through the body. Meaning, I could see that if you look at these lines here, the Disney animator was drawing, I think who is this, Ward Kimball maybe? I actually don't know who drew this. It looks like Ward Kimball's work to me. But the line would go up like this, but look, you can see that they drew through the body. And so and look, you can actually see right here this line, you can see it erased, but there's a line right here. He's drawing through this whole thing. And so he's drawing the force of this character, and he's not just considering the force that runs through the force that runs through the spine. He's not just considering the force that runs here on the edges. He's also considering how this force goes behind other objects and comes out on the other side. So this arm right here connects to the shoulder, connects to the back. Isn't that crazy to see? This leg breaks off, so if you look at it like this leg breaks off a piece of force, spirals it in this direction, and it's caught by the heel. Comes out like that. It really is like flowing water. You can see him, he's drawn, you can just see it, the line goes here, but it keeps going, because he's thinking about, well, what's going to catch this arm? What force on the other side is going to catch this arm? Well, the shoulder that catches it. So he's drawing through it. This is a little abstract. And also I think it might cause us to go, it's like, well, does this type of stuff only apply to Disney art? Slide number 2. Hold on. So the answer is no. No, it doesn't. What do we see, guys? Look at this. There's some very clear force lines running through this. Look how this shoulder breaks off from this guy here, pours down into this arm right here. And this guy's going the opposite direction like that. It takes a ton of energy to get this to come back here. You can feel the strain of it. this snake is just one big force line. And these kids are, I forget what the story is behind this, but wrestling. It goes into the hip, into the leg, all the way down. The whole thing has a force to it, and it has a line of action like this. You could generalize it like this. Do you guys starting to see the rivers of force that's flowing through this whole thing? So why would we call this like a river? What's useful about that? I learned this from an artist named Brad Seacrest. Brad Seacrest is the showrunner for Kibo. Have you guys heard of Kibo? I can't remember the exact title. It's a Netflix show. So I learned this in a class that I took from him, from Brad Seacrest. He said if you think of it like a river, let's say that this is a river, right? Let's say that this little river represents an arm. First, you consider these lines right here. You consider the banks of the river. You consider the direction of the river. Then when you're done with that, when you've got your first step done, remember our first step is going to be figuring out the force. When you figured out your first step, sorry, I don't have all my slides. So when you figure out your first step, this force, you figure that out. Then you start almost like putting rocks inside the river. you drop in like a rock right here, which is the deltoid, and then you drop in a rock right here, which is the bicep. And what happens when you drop rocks into a river? Well, the force of it, like the force of the water, has to adapt, has to carry, has to go around. The flow of it has to go around the rocks, so that by the end of your drawing, you can get to a place where not only do you have an arm that has anatomy, proper anatomy in it, but also the arm has the proper force in it as well. It doesn't just have form, it also has force. So it's kind of like a river. Does that make sense, you guys? We can look at one more example because this is so complicated. Let's draw the force of these characters. Well, it's not a character, but I just want to drill home the point that this is I'm showing you guys how the Disney animators use it and exaggerate it, but they derived it from life. It's not like they just made it up. So, can you guys start to see the force in this dancing person? It's so interesting, right, when you start looking at it and looking for it. I almost like to start from the head and let the lines come out. I could see, so in thinking about where this person is moving in this particular pose, there seems to be a lot of weight on this foot right here. So I'm going to be thinking about the energy traveling into that foot. There's a good line of action. There's a river for our little character. But even within that, these shoulders are connected here. The force goes through the form. Remember how we were seeing that? So these shoulders are kind of like a thing right here. And then the arms carry this force out into the world. This arm I'm going to skip for now. There's more important things to think about. There's bigger forces to think about. So off the rib cage, into the thigh. Off the thigh, into the calf. Off the calf, into the foot. This is so interesting. This line goes all the way up, to my mind, this line goes all the way up to the shoulder and is caught here. Why would that be? I would wonder if one of the reasons we're seeing that here is just because physically this knee here is the center. It has a certain center of gravity to where this knee is needed kind of needs to be here because the shoulder is there. They're connected. So off the knee into the calf, off the calf into the foot. Does that make sense to you guys? Here's a big line of action here. Here's the flow of the river, and then we're going to put little rocks inside of the river. Here's the rib cage. Here's the hips. Here's a ball that represents the knee, and another ball that represents the ankle. But where does this force come from? Well, I could pull it off of the butt. Have it flow like that. Put a ball that's a similar size as that one in there. And then, when I'm going through in my next step and I'm describing the actual form of things, I can really think about how the water is flowing on these objects, flowing past these objects, so that I can maintain this sense of movement as I start to add the force to it. All right, I don't know if we really need to get into this one, but yeah, really, dancing is just naturally gestural. So is this making sense, everybody? It's kind of exciting, right? It's like finding a little conspiracy theory. They've hidden it from us. Okay. So force is a spine. It's also a river. It's also a path. This is a really cool thing I found. And again, even though we're going to be practicing for our exercise this month, we're going to be practicing gesture using simplified sort of Disney-esque characters. These principles apply to really dynamic, any style you would want to do. It applies. This drawing is by an artist I really admire named Ben Caldwell. Really cool. He's got it. It's got everything. He's just so good at shape design. He knows his anatomy. He knows these principles. He's a master. He knows these principles and he applies them at every instance he can get, and it creates a really refined, beautiful product. This one is very cool. This is a drawing that he had posted, and he mentioned when he posted it that it needed some work. And as soon as he said that, someone in the comments was like, "What are you talking about? This is beautiful. Why do you think this needs some work?" And so this is going to be really cool, you guys. He actually breaks down what he sees when he's drawing this. So here is his gesture. Here is his force that he's looking at as he's drawing this. This is his stuff, not mine. And he says, I think of force as a path. You're walking along this path, and you get to certain turns. So for instance, if you're walking along the arm here, you get to turn number 1, you turn and go down this direction. Turn number 2 for this shoulder. And if I was to go through and see all the paths in this drawing, I would see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, because he's also included the elbow of the character, I believe. Even though you can't see the elbow, he goes through it. You guys see that? He's also considering the force that goes through the form. So 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 turns in my path, is what he would say. And I think the imagery that he's pulling out is like if you were on a roller coaster and you had to make these really sharp turns, it would actually slow the roller coaster down, right? He's saying that the path for his eye is not as flowy as it could be. Like if you were to also go back to the water analogy, if you were to try to push water down this, every time it would get to these hard angles right here, it would really have to work to get around it. And Ben Caldwell's technique for making a drawing that is more smooth, more effective, is to have less of these turns on his path. so that the eye, because we're also talking about the flow of the eye, where the eye travels, can so that the eye can move through the piece faster, so that the flow of the figure is more clean, almost like those Mickeys that we were drawing earlier. Like right now, one single flow, there's 0 turns in this. There's 0 turns in this path. But he had 2, and so let's go back and look at the original drawing. What he's saying is that this drawing could have more energy if he wanted to give it more energy. So how would he do that? Well, here's an example where he's drawn over. Actually, we'll start with this one. Here's an example where he's redrawn the pose, but so that it has only 3 turns instead of 5. So yes, there's still an elbow bend, but he connects the 2 arms together. Yes, there's still a turn at the hips, but both legs come off the same turn. And yes, there's a turn at the knee, but that's a grand total of only 3 turns in his path. And what that does is it makes the gesture, it makes the force more clear, much more clear. So that when he redrew a sample of what the pose would look like, you can see that this pose actually has a lot more energy in it than the one previous had. Does that make sense? So you can see that the arms go all the way through. You can see that the spine connects right to the leg. And that this turn, this leg comes right off of this. And now he has a pose that has a lot more energy than this one does. Do you see that? Like, this is beautifully drawn. But if he wanted to add some energy, he would go crazy like this. How cool is that to actually see him dissect his own drawings? Now, one thing he wants to mention, and I probably should mention this too, is that there isn't only one solution to pumping this thing up. He adds in another solution. He says, so here's that. What if he was to bunch up the pose like this? Then you would have something that's like this. You would have a force that's like this. So there's still 1, 2, 3. There's still like only 1, 2, and 3 turns in our pathway, because the knee behind the leg counts as a turn. There's a way better flow. Do you guys see that? So for Ben Caldwell, that's what he's looking at when he's... So isn't that interesting? This is a guy who's mastered his stuff, and when he looks at his work to see if it's good or not, he's using the basics to correct it. He's going, how does the force look in this pose? And he's doing very simple math, so to speak. He's counting the amount of turns in his path, and he's going, I could make this stronger. I could make this more interesting. Does that make sense, you guys? This is what it means when I say that force is a path. Finally, force is a story. And I don't have really any sample images for this. I just want to get back to the fact that, yes, we're trying to learn about clarity and dynamism and movement and all that stuff. I just want to remind you that it's, if you want to join me on this journey to learn how to draw dynamic figures for the sake of storytelling, or for the sake of broadcasting meaning, yes, we want to learn how to be clear, but we also always need to keep in mind, be clear about what? And why should we be clear? The whole premise of this type of drawing is that you have something to say, and you're trying to broadcast that meaning to somebody else. And so often another way to think of force is you're thinking about the story of what's happening. I once remember learning from an animator. I think she was an animator, or maybe a storyboard artist. She said that she would never try to draw a gesture until she had labeled the character's emotions. So she would actually write down, like, for instance, she would look at this dancer, and she would go, she would write joyful before she started her gesture, she would write joyful warrior. And then she would go in and start drawing the gesture. So here I've started drawing the gesture. You could already see that rather than having the foot be on the ground, I've lifted the foot off the ground slightly. I've tucked the leg in to get it a little more clear. And I've bent the arm and pushed these arms forward. So this is very similar to this, but because I was thinking about joyful warrior, I was thinking about a sword coming out of her hand, poking forward, and that she's kind of floating up off the ground. I had this meaning, I had this story I was telling myself as I was creating this gesture. Whereas if I was to, I could actually do an entirely different label on the same pose. Maybe I want to emphasize the calmness of her face. So I could say, what would her motive be? She seems like she'd be dancing. Like she's dancing because she's at peace. Peaceful dancing, maybe. Peaceful dancer. Again, I already have a story I want to emphasize in this. So if it's peaceful, I feel like I might plant that foot a little bit more. I might do something like this. I could see an eye here popping out where her eyes are closed because she's kind of peaceful. And I've leaned her head over because there's just sort of a languidness in her pose where it's like she's dancing but she's also relaxed. It's so much different than the joyful warrior, isn't it? And the foot's a little bit closer to the ground. And she's sort of leaning over and like leaning on the air. So these are two different stories about the same pose. Meaning is what we're going for with force. We're trying to find meaning. And if you have a story, you're trying to say, this character is feeling this. I want this pose of this character to embody the force of the emotions behind this character, the force of the meaning that I have planned for them. Does that make sense? So yes, we're looking for clarity, but clarity about what? What are you trying to say? What do you want to say? All right, that finishes today's lecture on force. Next month, we'll be doing form, and then the month after that we'll be doing rhythm. Stay tuned, it's going to be exciting. Here's your homework, everybody. Go on the internet, look up, let's do Mickey because he's so clear. Look up a Mickey character sheet that you can use as reference. And let's start to try to draw some on-model Mickey characters. Or if you'd like, I can break it down into something a bit simpler. You're going to take a sphere for the head. You're going to take a bean for the body. And then those they're in. Some big beans for legs, and some gloved hands, I guess. It doesn't have to be perfectly on model. I take that back. I mean, use the reference though. Like, try to draw Mickey, but what we're really aiming for is the force. And I won't be correcting you. I won't be critiquing you on whether your characters are on model or not. I'm just going to be looking at the force. Try to do the things that we talked about today. Where here's a story here, right? Like, make sure you have a story. He's looking for something. So his nose is pointed forward. His whole body is leaning forward. Make sure you have a line of action that goes through the whole thing and is your main current of force that's running through it. But also consider how the force breaks off into the figure. Also consider how within even the arms, the force that's going through the arms, guess what? The force travels out through the fingers too. How wild is that? That they make the force go all the way through the fingers. These fingers right here, like this thumb, there's a reason it's arcing this way. There's a reason it's coming out like that. It's because the animator was thinking about the force that was traveling through the whole thing. And finally, draw through. Draw your force through the form. See how this arm connects to the other arm. So, yeah. Show me some drawings with force in them. Show me some drawings with this line of action, with this energy that we're looking for. First, we're focusing on the force. And, yeah. Oh, finally. Please, don't do this alone. So, if you're on this tier, you've been welcomed into the Doodle Alley Studios Discord. I originally, again, it was just a tight group of artists, but now that I've opened up the $5 tier, there's a lot of people in there. So, but hopefully everyone's being well behaved. Let's see here. There is share your art in the art share, and join us with the sketchbook challenge, where we draw stuff. If you're struggling with these concepts, don't do it alone. Let's do this together. And eventually, I'll be asking for you guys to upload your Mickey drawings for critiques. But practice this for a week or two before you upload your stuff. So maybe I'll get overwhelmed when critiques day comes. I'll try to get to as many as I can, but hopefully I can get to everyone. So if that makes sense, let me know. If you have any questions, sound off in the comments. But thank you guys, and I will talk to you soon.